Scrolling along with Susan here. Hey, if you've watched any of my videos, you know that I really like to work with the scroll saw, and most of my designs have been on the scroll saw. But I do like woodworking, and I do like to branch out. And I have been told before that if you're going into woodworking, kind of a rite of passage is to make a cutting board. And this is the very first one that I've made. I've made 5 or 6 since then. But I'm going to be doing a cutting board on this project. And I have an old cutting board that has a nice juice groove in it, and it's small, and it's only about, I don't know, it's a little over a 1/4 of an inch thick. And it's got this crack in it, and it's pretty beat up. So I want to replace this, and I want to put the juice groove in it and a little handle and be just like this, but I'm going to be using cherry. Guess what, folks? I am not ready to do a cutting board with a juice groove. It is too advanced for me right now, so this is just going to be a simple cutting board that I'll be doing, and hopefully do a juice groove later on. Here's a piece of cherry that I have. This is raw, as you can see. It's about 1 1/4 inches thick, and it will be a nice width. It's a little bit wider, just a little bit. By the time I'm done with it and cutting off the edges, it'll probably be about the same size. So I'm going to take this very raw piece of lumber and process it and end up with hopefully a very nice little cutting board. So I hope you enjoy this project. The planer that I'm going to use recommends that the boards are at least 12 inches long or longer. So I am measuring this 13 inches long, and I'll be using that to process it through the planer. I'm going to be jointing it on my 4-inch jointer here, and I'm lucky enough to have a professional woodworker to teach me how to use this jointer properly. So here's my piece of cherry, and I have to look at the direction of the grain and how it's going. It's pretty flat on this side, but it actually curves down. So I'm going to be running my jointer from this direction for the smoothest edge. That's amazing. That was only 3 passes, and I almost have it exactly the way that I want it. I'll probably do it about 2 or 3 more times to make a nice smooth edge to work with. Now I'm going to be taking it over to the table saw and flattening out the other edge. Luckily the wood is flat enough that I'm going to do the edges before actually planing it. So I set it so it will just barely take off this one end, laying my nice jointed edge against the side as a guide. So here I am at my Win 12.5 inch thickness planer, and I'm going to be barely taking off. I'm going to lay, first of all, the flattest side down and barely be taking off pieces. So it's going to be running through here many, many times. And I have it set up so that it will go through, and then I start in smaller increments until it's going to, there, now it stops. So that's where I'm going to start planing. And I'm going to be running this through so many times. And I don't know how thick I want this to be. Now, if you have the proper equipment to use the bandsaw and cut it in half, then it will take a lot shorter time. But my bandsaw happens to be, it will only cut 6 inches thick, and this is 6.5 inches. So I'm going to have to be doing it the long way with the equipment that I have and using my planer. I probably ended up running it through the thickness planer about 30 times. And each time you only want to do it about 1/4 of a turn, so you're not taking off too much at one time, and making sure to flip it over so that both sides are nice and even. Then after this process, after it's about 1/2 inch thick, make sure you do a thorough sanding before continuing on. You want to get rid of that snipe that was created by the thickness planer as well. I'm here at my DeWalt 788 scroll saw, and I have pre-drilled a hole for the handle, and I'm going to smooth off the edges and cut my handle out on my scroll saw. I've got a number 5 blade in here. Number 5 or 7 would be fine. You're using hardwood, so you can go to a higher number, and there's not a lot of intricate detail here. You could use a jigsaw for this process, but you're not going to get nearly the smoothest and best result with the jigsaw, so I strongly recommend a scroll saw. So I'll be cutting out the handle. I'll be cutting off some of the edges so I can round them over. And then I'll be taking them over to my disc belt sander to just give that extra rounded off edge. I don't own a spindle sander, so I just have this nice little attachment that I put on to my drill press to sand the inside of this. Now, using a scroll saw, it is quite smooth, but I'm just going to give it another little touch to make it really smooth. I must say, I just love using all my collection of tools each time I do a project. It's so much fun. I'm over here at my router table, and I have a roundover bit in to smooth the edges or curve the edges. But I ran into some problems here, and I actually chipped away a piece of the wood. So I decided not to use this method and use my belt sander instead. So I'm just going to skip over this little step from here on out. This technique of using the belt sander worked out much better. I did have to do quite a few passes on all sides, but it really achieved the same goal of rounding over the edges on the top and the bottom quite nicely. And then on the corners, I'd have to hand smooth the corners out. Once I've done the rough sanding on the belt sander, I'm over here with 220 grit sandpaper, doing all of the edges and the corners again, making sure that it's nice and smooth, as well as the handle that I cut out on my scroll saw. Well, I learned a lot from this video. I learned that I am not ready to do a juice groove with this complicated curve in it and this thin of a board, because I did some samples and they did not turn out well. I need some more experience. So I need to do a juice groove on a board that's at least 3/4 inch thick and is square or rectangle for my first one to attempt something nice. So I have this perfectly great cutting board that's a 1/2 inch thick and nice curved edges with a handle. And this will be great for me. I'm just going to leave this as a cutting board without a juice groove. After my major sanding, the next step is to wet the whole board down with water, let it dry, which raises the grain, and then you can sand again. This water did a really good job of raising the grain, and I know what I'm going to be sanding off now. I'm going to be using 500 grit for the final sanding. Now, if you want to put water on it one more time and raise the grain again, you can keep doing that until you get the exact smoothness that you want. I'm here at my stove, and what I've added is a little bit of just plain mineral oil into my pan, and I've already shaved off some pieces of beeswax, and I am just using a pinchful of that inside here. Melt it all down, let it cool, and then I'll be ready to seal my board. Now you can use just plain mineral oil on this without the beeswax, or you can buy Butcher Block conditioning oil, which already has beeswax in it if you don't have access to that. I've got a lot of friends that have bees, so it's easy for me to obtain that. And I like to use my fingers. You can use a rag, but with my fingers I can feel all the crevices and make sure that I'm not missing anything. And I can just check too and make sure there's no rough edges that I missed. And I will be doing this probably 3 or 4 coats total. I want to encourage everyone to make their very first cutting board. You do not have to use all the tools that I use. You can buy a ready-made board, cut the shape out with your scroll saw and the handle, hand sand, and get some mineral oil and put it on your board, and you've got a cutting board. So give it a try. If you like what you see, click that like button, subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.